state your full name and spell your first and last name for the record?
Chad Connor Carrizales, Chadcarrrideales.
Thank you.
Good morning, Mr. Carrizales.
Good morning.
Mr. Carrizales, where do you work?
I work at a squadron called VMPT 101 at NCS Miramar.
VM.
FAT 101.
And what do you do for your squadron?
I coordinate between supply and the squadron as far as ordering supplies, assets, parts, and such.
And how long have you had your position?
The current position I've had for about 5 to 6 months.
Before your current position, what is your position title?
Jet engine mechanic, or F-18 engine mechanic.
Before you had your current position, what was your position before?
It's kind of hard to say. I would say plane captain would be the qualification as far as the level of what I do, but it would just be working on the jets, changing tires, oil changes, things and such.
How long have you been with the Marines?
A little over 4.5 years.
Before you were assigned to Miramar, did you have to go through any sort of training?
Yes, I went through basic training, obviously, and then I went to 2 different schools, ANC school, as far as basic training on jets.
And when did you go to basic?
I went to basic in May of 2013.
Is that here in San Diego?
Yes.
And then you went to 2 additional classes, is that right?
Yes. Well, right after I went to combat training for a couple weeks, and then I went to Pensacola, Florida, for the first school for training, and then I went to Virginia for the second school.
So was your training in Florida and Virginia both related to the repair of jet engines or?
Yes, the first one was more general, and then we were assigned a specific, I guess, field as far as aircraft, and that's what the second school would be more specific.
And if I may ask, Mr. Carrizales, how old are you?
I'm 23 years old.
And is there some sort of requirement on base that when you're under the age of 25, you have to have some sort of a parking permit?
It's not a parking permit. You're required to take it's called...
Excuse me, Your Honor. This is what we just spoke about. So I'm going to propose an objection as to 352.
Overruled, prior ruling. If you wish to go sidebar to clarify, that's fine.
Thank you, Record.
You may continue.
When we arrive to the squadron, normally they send us to a driver's improvement course, per se. It's called Arrive Alive at 25. So if you're under 25, you have to go to, generally. Not everybody necessarily goes. But.
When did you arrive to your squadron?
In January of 2014.
Now, how big is your squadron?
It's one of the biggest ones. I'd say, I mean, obviously it varies, but probably around 650 people, generally.
And when you arrived to your squadron in January of 2004, how many people arrived new with you to your squadron?
2014.
Yes, 2014, thank you.
At the time I arrived along with Mr. Slang and Mr. Wolfer at the same time, and then shortly after, it was kind of in waves. There'll be a couple people at a time.
And when you arrived, is there anyone in the courtroom that you recognize today?
Yes.
Could you describe or explain how you know someone in the courtroom?
I know Mr. Jason King from working with him at VMPT 101.
And when you said you arrived to your squadron in January 2014 with Mr. Slang and Mr. Wolfrey, were you at the squadron when Mr. King arrived?
Yes.
Did he arrive at the same time as you?
It was maybe a week after. It was shortly after.
When you arrived to the squadron, did you have to go through that class? You Ride Alive for 25?
Originally I was supposed to. I actually didn't go through that class until maybe a year ago.
Now, you mentioned that you know Mr. King. Would you say that the two of you were friends?
Yes.
Is it fair to say that you're here testifying today because you received a subpoena to come and testify?
Yes.
I'd like to take you back to May of 2015. In the very beginning week of May of 2015, did you attend a safety stand-down?
I'm not sure on the exact date, but I have attended several safety stand-downs as part of the Marine Corps.
What is a safety stand-down?
It's basically not a class, I guess sort of a class, presentation per se. Normally with multiple speakers, they have it all scheduled out as far as this person's going to talk about this person's going to talk about this. And everyone goes generally to the theater they have on base and they present a bunch of different topics as far as safety things, base stuff, just general topics.
How often do you have these safety stand-downs?
I guess it kind of varies. I want to say every 6 months, sometimes not for a year, it just depends. They've kind of changed things up as the years have gone.
When we are talking about the safety stand-down, you mentioned that they take place in the theaters, at the Bonhoeffer Theater,
Yes.
and who all attends a safety stand-down?
Generally, everyone, unless there's extenuating circumstances. If someone's on leave or basically everyone's supposed to attend. They don't necessarily, you're supposed to sign in, I guess, as you go into them, but necessarily not everyone's not always there.
And when you say everyone, are you talking everyone in your squadron?
Yes, everyone in the squadron. It's per the squadron as far as like this, especially probably because our squadron's so big. So all the officers, staff NCOs, and CO, everyone in the whole squadron attends, other than special circumstances or some people try to get out of it with appointments or whatever.
And Miramar, there's several different squadrons that operate out of Miramar areas, is that right?
Yes.
And now your squadron, have you been with the same squadron since January of 2014?
Yes.
Now, is your squadron, is it assigned to a building or a certain premise on the base?
Yes, it's Hangar 3. I think I'm not sure of the building number, but it's Hangar 3.
And would it be fair to say that that's where you have gone to work every day since January of 2014 on work days?
Yes.
And this Hangar 3, is that also where the defendant, Mr. King, is that where he worked as well?
Yes.
And are you aware of what his assignment or his role was within the Marines?
Yes. I'm not sure as far as time frame, but for the beginning, we all worked together at in power line, or power plants, I guess would be our division inside of the squadron. And then from there, except I'm not sure of the time, he was moved to tool room.
I'm sorry, you might be moved to
Tool room?
tool room?
Yes.
And is the tool room located in that Hangar 3 as well?
Yes.
And when you walk into Hangar 3, is there any sort of a sign outside of Hangar 3 that discusses or says anything about impaired driving or DUIs?
I know there definitely is now. Beforehand, I'm not sure. I know for a while we had a countdown board where the CO back in the day, if we went 90 days without an alcohol-related incident, we would get an extra day off. But I'm not sure if there was a sign other than that presented.
And in your 4.5 years with the Marines, how many safety stand-downs would you say that you've been to?
Anywhere from 7 to 10, I believe. I can't give you an exact number.
And at these safety stand-downs, is driving under the influence ever a topic?
Yes, not necessarily all of them, but it's definitely been a topic.
More than once?
I believe so.
Now, do you remember attending a safety stand-down on the beginning week of May of 2015 before the crash in this case happened?
Yes.
And were you working that day?
I was there at the safety stand-down.
When you were at the safety stand-down, Do you remember any of the people that presented that day?
Not exactly like names or who they were, but I remember there was a cop that was there.
And the police officer that was there, was it someone from the San Diego Police Department?
As far as I know, yes.
And what was the topic that police officer was talking about?
I think it was a myriad of things as far as like texting and driving, just safety in general, and then obviously falls under safety would be drinking and driving.
And do you remember that during that SCPD officer's presentation at any point in time, he warned about the dangers of drinking and driving?
As far as I know, yes. I mean, anyone who would present about drinking and driving, I'm sure, would be talking about the dangers of it.
And do you remember seeing the defendant, Mr. King, at that safety stand-out?
Not specifically.
Be fair to say, though, you're seated in a large theater, is that fair?
Yes. Hundreds of people in it.
Do you remember anything else about what that San Diego police officer was talking about regarding the topic of driving under the influence?
No.
Do you remember giving a statement or meeting with my investigator, Mr. Edwards, basically back in September of 2015?
Vague.
I'd like to now direct your attention to something called the Arrive Alive card. What is that?
It's this card that most people are, I think everyone's supposed to get issued it. I know that we're supposed to have them. And I think it has to do with the safety course. And it's basically, to my knowledge, not many people obviously use them. I think that Uber and everything, but you're supposed to give it to, or use it with a taxi if you don't have the money to get a taxi or something along those lines. And then when you come through the gate, I guess the squadron pays the taxi, and then you pay them back, something along those lines. It's just like a little paper card they give you that you're supposed to keep on you.
And do you remember ever getting one of those cards?
Yes.
Did you get that card when you first arrived at the squad?
Shortly thereafter.
And is it fair to say that that card would cover the cost of a cab fare back to base?
As far as I know.
Have you ever used yours?
No. I don't know that I know anyone who does.
You said you didn't know anyone who's used it?
No.
Why not?
I mean, I guess, I don't know if it's generally just because people have money to use a taxi or whatever. It just seems like a complicated way to get home versus calling a friend or any other option.
Is there any ramifications if someone comes back onto base after they've consumed alcohol and they're driving?
If they're driving and they consume alcohol?
Yes.
Yes, I mean, obviously they'd give them a DUI, or you might get field sobriety tested, or...
When you come back onto base, do you actually have to go through some sort of a guard station or anything like that?
Yes, there's like a sentry tower per se. You drive through, they check your ID, and they let you through. I mean, obviously if you have your ID.
And when you drive through that sentry tower, have you ever had some question whether you've been drinking that night when you went through that sentry tower?
Yes.
Is that common?
Depending on the time, but I'd say yes.
In the evenings, would you say that's common?
Yeah, more generally, like if you're coming in late, midnight to 2 a.m., they're more likely to ask you if you've been drinking or things like that.
Are you familiar with the term a liberty briefing?
Yes.
What is a liberty briefing?
Basically, we would just call it like a weekend brief, is more what it's called. But liberty just means like our free time. So if you have brief as far as like before the weekend, the supervisor, we'd all get in the shop together. For the most part, they would give a brief about safety, like don't drink and drive, don't have unprotected sex, just random safety things basically. Just be safe, have fun, don't get hurt.
You mentioned that would take place kind of within the squadron. Is that fair?
Yes.
that actually would take place, in a smaller environment with the people that you work with day to day. Is that right?
Yes.
How many people would you say take part in a weekend briefing?
It's normally the shift, so it could be anywhere from 15 to 40 people, maybe more.
And who usually runs that week?
The supervisor of the shop or whoever they appoint, sometimes they'll appoint somebody else, like, hey, give the weekend brief.
Does that happen every weekend?
Just depends for the most part, but I wouldn't say necessarily every weekend.
Would you say 80% of the weekends? Is that a fair assessment?
That says fair.
And some of the warnings that you're given is regarding driving safety, is that right?
Yes.
How often in those, the 80% weekends that you have that weekend brief, was the topic about drinking and driving, not to drink and drive?
Generally every weekend, it's just a very simple, like they'll say, don't drink and drive, and like that's pretty much it, as far as drinking and driving.
And no one ever explains why or what the ramifications are in those shorter weekends?
Very few times they might, but normally it's not a very detailed thing. It's literally like a, hey, don't be stupid, be safe.
And during the time that you were assigned to your squadron when Mr. King was there, how many weekend briefings would you say that you went through in that time frame?
I'm not sure. I don't know how many weekends I was there. Generally, I mean, if you're going to do 80% of a year and a half.
Your Honor, I want to make sure I understood the question. Did he ask, was the witness asked that he went through or that they went through?
I think she said that he personally
You
went through.
personally. Fair enough, thank you.
So 80% of, let's say, 52 weeks in a year, 2 weeks off for holidays, let's say, so let's talk 50, year and a half, 75 weeks, would you say 85% of that was somewhere around 55 or 60?
Probably somewhere around 50 to 60.
And of the 50 or 60 that you went to, or the weekend briefings that you heard, how many was the defendant present at, Mr. King?
I couldn't give you a number. We weren't necessarily always on the same shift, or even when he was in tool room, I don't know if they held briefs. I couldn't tell you.
How long was he in the tool room, if you're aware?
A couple of months, I'm not sure, honestly, as far as the exact number.
Was there any time that you saw the defendant at any of those weekend briefings of the 50 or 60 from January 2014 through May 2015?
Not that I could specifically recall, like remember seeing him or remember that meeting, but he obviously was there at some of those because we worked on the same shift at some point.
How long do you think the two of you worked the same shift?
Maybe 6-7 months. Not sure.
And during those 6-7 months, is it fair to say that when you were working those 6-7 months, that there was also liberty briefings during those 6-7 months?
Yes.
Or weekend briefings, sorry. And was the weekend briefings, were they optional?
Not generally, but they also weren't necessarily very strict about like, oh, where's this person? Like if somebody was busy or still working, like there's a possibility that they would be missed. There wasn't like a role stuff, like they wouldn't, I guess, triple check to make sure everyone was there. So it wasn't a very strict thing, but generally the majority of people from the shift would be there.
I'd like to direct your attention now to the evening of May the 15th of 2015. Do you remember whether or not you had any contact or met up with Mr. King, the defendant, at all?
Yes, I did.
Okay. When did you meet up with him?
Around 5 p.m.-ish.
Where did you meet him?
We drove to Pacific Beach Hotel, and we met there.
Were you driving with Mr. King?
No, I was driving with Mr. Slang.
And Mr. Slang, is he another work colleague
Yes.
and friend?
Yes.
When you drove to that hotel with Mr. Slang, were you still working the same shift as the defendant, Mr. King?
I can't.
When you drove to the hotel, do you remember what part of town?
Northern-ish Pacific Beach.
When you drove to that hotel, who was driving?
Mr. Slang.
What was the purpose of going there?
To meet up with another one of our colleagues, Mr. Wolfrey, and his parents out at the hotel.
And when you arrived to the area, was there anyone that you recognized that was arriving at the same time?
Yes, Mr. King.
And when Mr. King arrived, was he by himself?
Yes.
Was he driving his own vehicle?
Yes.
Are you familiar with what kind of vehicle he had?
An older Ford truck.
Were you good enough friends to know how long he had that truck?
Maybe a month or two, I'm not sure.
Did he have a vehicle before the truck?
Yes, he had another truck.
What kind of truck?
I believe it was another Ford.
And the other Ford that he had, at any point in time, did he park that on base?
Yes.
In order to park on base, do you have to have some sort of a permission or something like that?
You're supposed to get or back then you were supposed to get a decal, but there was technically, but most people don't, or a good number of people don't. There's also been issues as far as they've gone back and forth of if you do have to have it, if you don't have to have it based on safety reasons for having a sticker on your car saying you're in the military. So.
And were you aware back then, back in May of 2015, whether or not people needed a decal on their car to park on
As
base?
far as I know, you did. You were
did?
supposed to, if you lived on base.
Back in May of 2015, do you know where the defendant lived?
On base in the barracks.
When he had that truck, the first truck, are you aware of whether or not he had a decal on that truck to park on base?
I do not know.
And when you live on base, is there a parking area near your barracks where you can sleep or park your vehicles?
Yes, there's multiple parking lots surrounding the barracks.
And are they assigned parking, or how does that work? First come, first served?
It's first come, first served.
Had you ever driven in either one of the trucks with the defendant?
Yes, I have ridden in his truck before.
How often?
A couple of times. I wouldn't say like super often, but definitely multiple times.
Did you have a vehicle to use?
Yes.
And you mentioned that you went to Pacific Beach, to Northern Pacific Beach, and when you were arriving there, Mr. King was arriving at the same time, is that right?
Yes.
What was the next thing that happened?
We went to the hotel to meet up with Mr. Wolfrey and his parents.
And besides yourself and Mr. Slang, who you rode with, and the defendant, who else was at this gathering?
Mr. Wolfrey, his parents, and then later on, two other people showed up. Mr. Rodriguez and Mr. Perry.
Were they also colleagues of yours?
Yes.
And what were the group of you doing?
Just hanging out, talking. Some people were having a couple beers.
Was one of the people having a couple beers, Mr. King, the defendant?
Yes.
Could you see who brought the beers?
No, I don't recall who brought them.
Were you drinking that evening?
Yes.
What did you have to drink?
A beer or two.
You say the defendant had a couple of beers. Do you remember what kind of beers he was having?
Bud Light, something.
And besides the group of you hanging out, was there any activities that you did while you were at that hotel?
We went down to the hot tub for a little while.
When you're talking about me, who are you talking about?
I believe it was all of us, me, Mr. Wolfrey, Mr. Slang, Mr. Perry, and Mr. Rodriguez. And I believe Mr. King also, but I don't exactly recall.
When you're saying Mr. Wolfrey, you were talking about Dylan, correct?
Yes.
Now, where were his parents, Mr. Wolfrey's parents, when you went down to the hot tub?
In their room as far as I know.
When you were down at the hot tub, did any of you have anything else to drink?
I can't remember.
How long do you think the group of you stayed in the hot tub?
Probably anywhere from 30 minutes to an hour.
Where did you go then?
As far as I believe, back up to the room.
When you got back to the room, approximately what time did you leave the gathering?
I think it was about 10 or 11.
And when you left, who did you leave with?
I left with Mr. Slang.
And was Mr. Stein driving again?
Yes.
When you left, was Mr. King still at the gathering?
Yes, we all kind of left. People that left kind of all left at the same time.
So when you left with Mr. Slang, is it fair to say that the defendant also left at the same time?
Yes.
Through the course of the evening that you were at that party, from about 5 p.m. on, how much did you see the defendant drink?
So maybe 2, 3 beers.
When you left the party, did anyone question whether or not you were okay to drive or whether Mr. Stein was okay to drive?
Mr. Slang had been drinking, so there's no issue there.
Did you see anyone asking other people whether or not they were okay to drive?
I don't know.
Did anyone offer you to be able to stay at the hotel if you wanted?
Yes, both his parents had offered. I'm not sure when beforehand. We were welcome to stay the night if we wanted to.
And who was that offer open to?
Everyone, as far as I know.
When you left, did you have any sort of conversation with Mr. King about where he was going?
Yes, he said he was going to meet up with a friend at some bar.
And did that cause you any concern about continuing to go to another bar?
No.
Have you been out besides that one evening, in a social atmosphere with Mr. King before?
Yes.
And have you been out with him before when he's been drinking alcohol?
Not out. I wouldn't say like out. What do you mean by out exactly?
Going out off base, somewhere drinking
No.
alcohol? Have you been on base when Mr. King's consumed alcohol?
Yes.
And that's permitted on their bar?
Yes.
How often would you say that you've consumed alcohol with Mr. King?
Maybe a handful of times.
Besides working with Mr. King and going out with him a handful of times, would you say that you had a close friendship? Did you do anything else together?
There was times we hung out in the barracks, we watched movies, or went out, did things. I'd say it was pretty decently close friendship.
hanging out with all the group of you at the hotel, how much alcohol was at the hotel for you guys to drink?
I'm not sure.
And did either you or Mr. Stein bring any alcohol to the function?
No.
No further questions for this witness.
All right, thank you. Ms. Casey, cross-examination.
Morning, sir.
Morning.
Let's kind of get right to the safety briefings that you went through. You have a specific recollection that you attended the one just prior to this incident happening, correct?
Yes.
And you obviously had been to quite a few others, true?
Yes.
And first of all, how long do these typically last, generally?
Couple hours, maybe 2 hours.
And as you said, there's a myriad of topics that are discussed.
Yes.
Anything from drinking in the barracks, it's prohibited, right?
Yes, underage drinking or other things.
A myriad of things not having to do with drinking and driving.
Yes.
And then at some point, and about how many Marines or personnel are typically present?
That's spot into 500 to 700 probably.
In one room at one time.
Yes.
And during the portion that the police officer speaks with you, or at least the one that you remember spoke to you, he talked to you a little bit about drinking and driving, didn't he?
Yes.
And he told you, for example, that as a police officer, he's not going to give you any special treatment because you're in the military.
Yes.
And he told you such things, when I say he, many times there's several speakers, correct?
Yes.
Even attorneys sometimes will come to these, won't they?
Not sure.
And they talk to you about, if you get arrested for a DUI, what it can do to your military career.
Yes.
Tell you that you can lose your rank, correct?
Yes.
That you can get busted down a pay grade,
Yes.
that you might face what we call NJP, non-judicial punishment,
Yes.
or even in some situations you could face a court's martial, correct?
Yes.
They go through all of that, and that is all as it relates to your relationship with the military.
Yes.
And then the officer also tells you that if you get into an accident and hurt somebody, you could go to jail, correct?
Yes.
Now, were any written materials provided to you about DUI?
No.
Any books of any sort?
No.
Did you watch any videos?
Possible, I can't exactly recall.
And if I understood your testimony correctly, basically, all, at least from the enlisted standpoint, all Marines are supposed to attend these at some point, at various points during their tenure on base, correct?
Yes.
All the Marines.
Yes.
It's not just your squadron or just this squadron. It's a base-wide, in fact, it's a Marine Corps-wide policy, isn't it?
Yes.
At any time, did they bring in people that had been affected, like victims of DUI?
No.
Did they ever show you pictures of horrible crashes or things like that?
Not that I can recall.
Did you ever do any form of a one-on-one meeting with anybody to discuss specifically your drinking, how you perceive it, how you deal with it when you're out in the public?
No.
Did you ever attend any small group meetings that we would call kind of a group counseling session about alcohol as part of these safety standouts?
No.
Were you asked, other than signing in when you got there, were you asked to sign anything acknowledging that you had attended one of these safety standouts?
No.
At any point were you advised that now you and every other Marine, by virtue of the fact of them being a Marine and attending a safety stand-down, would be held to a different legal standard than the rest of the public.
Objection. Improper opinion.
Ask me if you was told that.
Overruled.
Were you ever told that?
No.
Were you ever told that now that you've been to one of these safety stand-downs, if you go out and do something, you're going to, and someone dies and you've been drinking, you are going to be charged with murder when the rest of the population would not have been. That was their level of education.
Objection. Improper opinion.
Sustained as phrased.
Were you ever told in this safety stand-down that as a Marine, that by virtue of you attending this class, and then if you drank and drove and killed somebody, that you would be charged with murder?
No.
And I, in response to my earlier questions, I assume the answer is no here, but, and you were never asked to sign anything that you acknowledge that now that I've been through this type of a class, I can be charged with murder. You never had to sign anything like that.
No.
Now, the Liberty briefings, fair to call these sort of informal gatherings.
Yes.
Again, there wasn't written materials handed out, or
No.
this was whoever was available prior to going out for the weekend. The command would call you in, and you guys would have a brief chat. True?
Yes.
And one of the things they tell you is don't drink and drive, right?
Yes.
You ever seen that message before, like broadcast on television?
Plenty of times.
Plenty of times. Never been told that while you were going to high school,
Yes.
when you took your driver training,
Yes.
when you enlisted in the Marine Corps, they tell you don't drink and drive.
Yes.
When you were in any other forums in your life, have you ever been to bars where they have signs that say don't drink and drive?
Yes.
You ever heard on the radio, don't drink and drive?
Yes.
And when you went to these Liberty briefings, they said to you, don't drink and drive.
Yes.
Once again, at these Liberty briefings, did they tell you that now that you've been to a Liberty briefing, you're going to be held to a higher legal standard out in the community?
No.
In terms of the this whole issue about the parking on the base and the decal, some people have the decal, some people don't, correct?
Yes.
People that don't may not have it because they just never got it, correct?
Yes.
Some people may not have it because, as you said, during certain times, they've changed the requirements as to whether you did require a permit or didn't require a permit, correct?
Yes.
So when you go through the parking lot, you will see vehicles that have the permits, and you'll see plenty of vehicles that don't have the permits, correct?
Yes.
Excuse me, go on.
No problem.
No. No further questions. Thank you, sir.
Any redirect?
Yes, thank you. Mr. Carrizales, when you went through the safety stand-down back in May of 2015, did you leave with the understanding that drinking and driving was bad?
Yes.
Did you leave with the understanding that drinking and driving, someone could get hurt?
Yes.
And in combination with that safety stand-down and all the Liberty briefings, did you have the understanding that drinking and driving could kill someone?
It's a possibility.
No further questions.
Anything else?
Yes.
Mr. Casey?
You were just asked if when you left the safety stand down, you left with the opinion that drinking and driving was bad. Was this a new concept to you before the Liberty briefing and the safety stand down?
Not at all.
Did you enter the safety stand down knowing that drinking and driving was bad?
Yes.
Did they tell you anything that you didn't know?
No.
Thank you.
Anything else, Ms. Bryant?
There.
All right. Mr. Carrizales, thank you for coming in, sir. We'll excuse you. Ms. Bryant, you may call your next witness.
Your Honor, may we, while she's calling her, may we have a brief sidebar?
Yes.
Please state your full name and spell your first and last name for the record.
Allen Slang, Allenslang.
Thank you.
Mr. Slang.
Good morning.
Mr. Slang, how old are you?
24.
Where do you work?
FMIT 101.
What is your position at the squadron?
I'm a sergeant, shift supervisor.
How long have you been a shift supervisor?
About a year now.
How long have you been with the Marines?
4 years and 9 months.
Where are you stationed?
MCAS Miramar.
How long have you been at Miramar?
4 years and 9 months.
What are your responsibilities as a shift supervisor?
Maintain personnel, coordinate maintenance, ensure safety.
And how many people do you supervise?
20 to 25.
And what was your position before you became a shift supervisor?
I was a plane captain.
And was that the first assignment you had with the FMT 101 as a plane captain?
Yes.
And what were your responsibilities?
Launching aircraft recovery, servicing, fueling, directing.
Is there anyone in court today that you recognize?
Yes.
Who do you recognize?
Jason King,
How do you know him?
Marine Corps.
How long did you know him in the Marine Corps?
I met him February 2014.
When you started even with the Marines, you said 4 years and 9 months. When did you actually start with the MAT?
That would have been February 2014.
Were you in the same kind of starting group as the defendant, Mr. King?
Yes.
Was that the first time that you met him?
Yes.
Did he have the same assignment as you as far as job responsibility at MCAS Miramar?
Yes.
And in the time from February 2014 through May of 2015, how often would you say the two of you worked the same shift?
Kind of hit or miss. We would rotate between the first and second shift. We worked probably about 6-7 months with him, but I hung out from outside work.
How do you know him from outside work?
What was that?
How do you know him from outside of work?
We worked in the same shop.
You worked together for 6 or 7 months, is that fair, on the same shifts?
On the same shift, yes.
And when you worked together during 6 or 7 months, did you also spend time together outside of work?
Yes.
Would you say that you two are friends?
Yes.
Is it fair to say that you're here testifying today because you received a subpoena?
Yes.
Now, in the time from February 2014 through May of 2015, during that time frame, were there any safety stand-downs that you personally attended?
There was one the week before May 15th, 2015. I was on leave for vacation, so I did not attend that one.
Did you have any other ones during that 15-month time frame?
Sure we did. I'm not really positive though.
In your 4.5 years with the Marines, how often have you had to attend a safety stand-down?
There's one before every summer for each year.
Are there any other times of year that they have them?
Not a safety stand down.
What about something called a liberty briefing?
It's a briefing we do before we go on weekend liberty. We pretty much discuss everything dangerous, utilizing operational risk management.
What sort of things, and in your role now as a sergeant, what sort of things are discussed at these liberty briefings?
The zero tolerance for drugs, drinking and driving, safe sex.
In the time frame that you were working with the defendant, Mr. King, from February 2014 through May of 2015, did you have any of these liberty briefings? Weekend briefings?
Yes, pretty much every weekend.
And how often was the topic DUI or the dangers of drinking and driving?
It's a pretty big thing. So there's signs in the squadron. Supervisors talk about it before every weekend liberty.
You mentioned that there's signs in the squadron. Were there signs back in May of 2015 that you remember?
Yes.
What kind of signs?
There's a pretty big sign outside our front. It's called like an ARI board. If anyone in the squadron goes without having an ARI, alcohol-related incident, we'll get a 72-hour liberty period, so it's an extra day out.
And what does it actually say on that board?
I couldn't tell you word for word.
And is there anywhere in your squadron, it's in Hangar 3, is that right?
Yes.
Is there anywhere in your squadron that you can recall seeing any other signs warning against the dangers of drinking and driving back in the time you started at Hangar 3 until May of 2015?
They have them usually outside of all the shops. There's usually like one thing I'll talk about, drugs and alcohol, the dangers.
Have you heard of the Arrive Alive program?
Yes.
What is that?
So every Marine that comes to MCS Miramar receives a card upon check-in. You basically present it, if you're unable to drive, you present it to your taxi, and then the taxi will take you to the front gate. The gate guards will pay the taxi, and then you'll pay the gate guard the following day once you're sober again.
And is there ramifications of coming on base if you're driving when you consume alcohol?
Yeah, they'll definitely snag you up instantly.
I'm sorry, the what?
They'll snag you up instantly. They know when you're drinking and driving.
And it would be fair to say that that wouldn't be good for your careers.
It would pretty much end your career.
Is this something that's that you can recall being relayed to you back in that time frame we're talking about, February 2014 through May 2015?
What do you mean by relate?
It was told you. Some people told you that during that time frame that there were ramifications if you came on base if you were DUI.
Yes, for sure.
So when you first got to base, you were 19 or 20?
20?
You mentioned that you spent time with Defendant Mr. King, not only when you were working together, but time outside of work. Is that right?
Yes.
How often would the two of you hang out?
A couple days a week, maybe.
Where did you live?
I lived in the barracks at the time.
And when you would hang out with the Defendant Mr. King, what would you do?
Work on cars, play video games.
Did you ever go off base and go and hang out somewhere?
Yes.
And did you ever drive in a vehicle that was driven by the defendant?
Possibly once or twice. Usually I did the driving.
When you arrived to your squadron, did you have to go through any sort of a class in order to be able to park on base?
Yes, I did.
And was the defendant, did he take that class with you?
I'm not sure.
Do you remember where you took that class?
Yes.
Where was it?
This is the building right next to our hangar at the time.
And how many people were in your class?
About 30.
Excuse me, I made a opposing objection here. This goes to our sidebar conversation.
Sustained, prior ruling.
Mr. Stein, I'd like to direct your attention to the evening of May the 15th of 2015. Do you remember spending time that evening with this defendant, Mr. King?
Yes.
How did you start that evening?
What time frame do you want me to start at?
Starting around 4:30 in the afternoon. Did you have contact with the defendant?
Yes, I had gotten off of vacation and I wanted to change oil in my car, so we both went and changed oil. We then stopped back at base to get Mr. Carrizales, and then we headed down to Pacific Terrace, which was the hotel down at PV.
When you say that you'd gotten off vacation, you wanted to take your oil change, did you have a decal on your car to park on base?
Yes, I did.
And did you see a decal on the defendant's car parked on base?
It was a newer truck, so I'm not sure if he had it yet.
Do you know of his previous truck if he had a decal to park on base?
I believe he did, so yes.
Now, after you went and had your oil change, how long did that take?
25 minutes?
And at that point in time, you're driving your vehicle, is that right?
Yes.
And the defendant was driving his truck?
Yes.
Where did the two of you go then?
Back to base.
What happened next?
I got Mr. Carrizales
Where did the three of you go?
down to Pacific Beach.
What time was this approximately?
Say we arrived 5:36 maybe.
And what did you do once you got to Pacific Terrace?
We met up with Mr. Wolfery and his parents.
And what did you do that evening with Mr. Wolf and his parents?
Sat by the hot tub, kind of just hung out. His parents were in town, just talking.
Was anyone drinking any alcoholic beverages?
Yes.
Who was drinking?
Mr. Wolfery, Mr. Rodriguez, Mr. Perry, Mr. King.
Did you have anything to drink that evening?
I was a designated driver for the night.
No?
No.
And how long did you actually stay there at the Pacific Terraces?
We got there about 6, left around 10:30, so 4.5 hours.
And during that time frame, during that 4.5 hours, was there anyone else that joined your group, or was it basically 5, 6 of you Marines as well as Dylan's parents?
It was Mr. Carrizales, myself, and King at first. Mr. Perry and Mr. Rodriguez showed up, I'd say 8:30, 9 o'clock. They showed up later at the hotel.
And during that evening, how much time did you actually spend with the defendant?
Pretty much the whole night.
Did you see him drink anything alcoholic?
Yes.
What did he have to drink?
2 beers from what I remember.
And where was the drinking taking place?
A little bit by the hot tub and then in the room as well.
when you left at 10:30, who did you leave with?
Mr. Carrizales?
Were you leaving at the same time as anyone else?
Yes, Mr. King, he parked his truck right behind my car.
Before you left, did you hear anyone asking Mr. King whether or not he was okay to drive?
Mr. Wolfrey's parents pretty much made sure everyone was all right, but no one, the people that were staying there, the people that were drinking knew they were staying there, because they were going to further go out to the bars at night, but everyone that left was definitely sober.
You said that the people that were drinking, with the exception of Mr. King, all stayed there, is that right?
Yes.
Now, in the times when you've gone out with Mr. King before, has there ever been a time when the two of you have both gone out and you consumed alcohol?
Pretty much only on my 21st birthday.
And on your birthday, you weren't driving, is that fair to say?
I was not driving.
Was Mr. King driving?
No.
Was there ever a time when the two of you went out and had alcohol and either one of you were driving?
No, this is 11:01 happens.
Sustained.
Was there ever a time when the two of you might have gone for 1 or 2 beers after work and driven somewhere?
Is there an objection?
Sustained.
Mr. Slang, was there ever a time that you saw the defendant have 1 or 2 beers or anything more and then get behind the wheel of his car?
Same objection.
Sustained.
With the Liberty briefings that you attended, how many of those Liberty briefings in that 14, 15-month time frame would you say that the defendant was with you at that Liberty briefing or the weekend briefing?
Pretty much every weekend for about as long as we're on the shift, so 6, 7 months.
And during those weekend briefings every 6 to 7 months, how often would you say the topic of driving under the influence or the dangers of driving under the influence came up?
Every Thursday when our shift ends, because Friday starts our weekend. And then when we get back to work to start a new week, they'll ask you if anyone got in trouble and they'll go over it again.
Thank you. No further questions for this witness.
Okay. Cross-examination.
Yes, Judge, are we going up to 10:30?
Yes.
Good morning, sir.
Morning.
We've heard the term ARIs thrown around quite a bit. That means alcohol-related incident.
Yes.
And when you do these, for example, the Liberty briefings, they talk about all the different types of ways that Marines can get in trouble, whether it's legal trouble or personal trouble out on the weekends, correct?
Yes.
And the whole purpose of them is just a friendly reminder that this could really jeopardize your military career.
Yes.
And that can include underage drinking,
Yes.
drinking driving,
Yes.
public intoxication,
Yes.
getting into inappropriate situations with minors,
Yes.
safe sex,
Yes.
domestic violence.
Yes.
All of those things are talked about in these very little brief, what you call Liberty briefings, right?
Yes.
You were asked about the decal on your car that you had to attend a type of class to get that decal.
Yes.
And you don't know whether or not Mr. King attended such a class.
I mean, I don't believe so, because he did check in like a week or two after me. So I would have been first with Mr. Wolfrey, but I don't believe he was there with me.
And when you were asked if his prior truck, not the newer truck, but the prior truck had a decal, you responded that
I believe he had one
you
on.
believe it. Do you remember actually seeing one on the car, or do you believe that he had one because you saw him parking on the base?
I mean, it's pretty common to have a decal, so I can't be for certain, but
And you did see him park on base, correct?
yes.
And you would also agree that there are people that park on base that have decals, correct?
Yes.
And there are people that park on base that don't have decals, correct?
Yes.
Okay, that's all the questions I have. Thank you.
Redirect.
Mr. Slide, what is it that made you believe that the defendant had a decal on his previous truck?
Our squadron will pretty much force you to get a decal.
Thank you. Nothing further.
Anything else, Mr. Casey? All right, Mr. Slade, thank you for coming in, sir. We'll excuse you. Let's go ahead and start with our next witness, Ms. Bright.
People call Dylan Wolfrey.
Mr. Shaw, give us matters the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God.
I do.
Thank you. Please be seated at witness stand. Please state your full name and spell your first and last name for the record.
Dylan Wolfrey, Dylan Woolfrey.
Thank you. Good morning, Mr. Wolfrey. Mr. Wolfrey, where do you work?
I work at GMF 1811.
On your mark?
Yes.
How long have you worked there?
Coming up on 5 years.
When were you first assigned to Miramar?
It was February 2014.
What is your role at VFMAT 101?
Right now I'm a supervisor for my crew.
How long have you been a supervisor?
About a year or two.
What was your role or your position before you became a supervisor?
Just a worker.
Is there anyone here in court that you recognize as someone that you used to work with at MCAS, Miramar?
Just Mr. King.
How do you know the defendant, Mr. King?
He was a friend during the first about year we were there together.
Did the two of you work together?
Yes, we did.
And when you said that you were working together, did you have the same shifts, or how did that work?
We got moved around a lot, but I believe we were on the same shift for at least one period of time.
How long?
I can't recall specifically.
A month or two, or maybe a little longer?
Maybe
Okay, which one?
about a month or two.
And did you and Lieutenant Mr. King, did you ever socialize outside of work time?
Yes.
How often?
2 to 3 times a week.
What would you do?
Anything really. Hang out in the barracks, play video games. Go out occasionally. We were young Marines, so we didn't have much money, but
May I ask how old are you?
I'm 26 now.
fair to say that the two of you were good friends?
Yes.
And are you here testifying today because you received a subpoena?
Yes.
Now, you mentioned that you would hang out together at barracks. Were you living in barracks back in, from the time you started through May of 2015?
Yes.
When you would go out as friends, who would drive?
Just whoever picked the shortest straw at the moment.
Was there ever a time when you traveled with the defendant driving? Mr. King driving?
Yes.
And did you ever drive in his truck?
I did.
And were you a good enough friend to know when he switched vehicles? Bought a new car or sold an old car or anything like that?
Yes.
And did he have a car before he had a white pickup?
Yes.
What kind of car did he have before?
Had a black pickup truck.
And did you ever ride in that black pickup truck?
I did.
And were you aware of whether or not Mr. King had a decal to park on base with that black pickup?
I'm sorry, can you say that again?
Are you aware of a decal that you can get to park on base?
Like a permit?
A permit or a car decal that goes on your vehicle?
I'm not aware of those.
Are you familiar with the term safety standout?
Yes.
What is a safety standout?
They're held annually, usually before the summer period, as a means to provide information to Marines.
And in the time that you've been with the Marines, have you had one of these safety standouts every year before the summertime?
Yes.
And because you entered, or you started with your squadron in February of 2014, would it be fair to say that you had a safety stand down in sometime in the late spring or early summer of 2014,
Yes.
before the summertime? Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
And with safety stand downs, when you're part of your squadron, do they all attend the safety standards or required to?
It is required unless you're on leave or, I'm pretty sure just unless you're on leave.
And what is discussed at the safety stand downs?
They discuss a lot of different things. They touch a lot of different topics on safety all across the board.
What are some of the topics when it comes to the area of driving?
Driving safely, using the speed limit, seat belts, not driving drunk, and road hazards and weather conditions.
Would this be a convenient place to break?
Prior to our weekends, we do like a brief talk about how to be safe in general and what steps to take, and just across the board with anything that could be dangerous.
And are those called liberty briefings or weekend briefings?
Yes.
And how often, we talk about the time frame from February 2014 through May of 2015, how many of those weekend briefings did you participate in?
Every week.
And in the course of that time frame, you mentioned that there was about a month or two when you were working the same shift as the defendant, Mr. King, is that right?
Yes.
And those weekend briefings or liberty briefings, is it fair to say that, when do they happen, like in the course of your week?
Just prior to being secured for the weekend.
What does that mean, being secured for the weekend?
So as soon as we pretty much get off on our Friday, whichever day that may be, prior to our 2 days off.
So secured basically means when released for your weekend
Yes.
or when you're done for the week?
Yes.
And during that 14, 15-month time frame, do you remember ever attending one of these weekend briefings or liberty briefings with the defendant?
I can't recall.
Now, these weekend briefings, how often was driving under the influence a topic?
Every week.
I'm sorry?
Every week.
And how often would driving under the influence and the dangers of driving under the influence be discussed?
Weekly.
Are you also aware or familiar with the Arrive Alive card?
Yes.
What is that?
Everyone in the Marine Corps under 25 has to go through a course. It's basically like a driver safety course, and they go over drunk driving as well.
And did you have to attend that class?
I did.
And are you aware, or where was the defendant attending the class with you?
He was not.
Now, at any point in time, has the Marine issued some sort of a card that can be used for cab fare?
Yes.
Okay. And are you familiar with that's called the Arrive Alive card?
Yes.
And when were you issued that card?
After the course.
What does that card do?
I believe it waives the taxi fee, and then it's paid by your command, and then the rest is at your command's discretion.
And do you have one of those cards?
I'm over 25, so I don't have one anymore.
Now, in your unit, VFMAT 101, are there any signs, or were there any signs back when you first got into the unit in February 2014 that addressed the dangers of drinking and driving?
I believe so.
Where were they?
There was a DUI board as you walk in the gate at work.
And what was on that DUI board?
It's a count how many days the squadron has gone without a DUI.
What about anywhere else within the squadron or Hangar 3? Was there any other signs that were posted around involving the dangers of drinking and driving?
I don't believe so.
Back in the time frame from February 2014 through May 2015, when you lived on barracks, did you ever go off of barracks with the defendants?
Not often.
I'd like to now direct your attention back to the evening of May the 15th of 2015. Do you remember that night?
I do.
Were the people here in town visiting you? Were the people here in town
Yes,
visiting
ma'am.
you? Who was that?
My mother and father.
Where were they visiting from?
Maryland.
And did you have plans that night, or did you, with your parents or some of your friends from the Marines?
I was with my parents, and I asked them if it would be all right if I just invited a few close friends over to get out of the barracks. They're staying in a nice place, so I figured it'd be good for them to get out and get a change of view, I suppose.
And before that time when your parents were in town, do you remember the week prior that there had been a safety stand down?
I do.
And do you remember anything about what was discussed at that safety stand down the week before?
It was the usual driver safety, that sort.
Did you remember whether or not there was a police officer who actually spoke at that safety stand down?
I believe there was, yeah.
And do you remember that police officer saying anything about the dangers or the consequences of driving under the influence?
Yes.
What did he say?
I believe he went over the consequences, being up to like $10,000 fine and so on and so forth.
Did he say anything about what happened if someone got hurt or worse in a crash?
I can't exactly remember.
Now, do you recall at that safety stand down whether or not you saw Lieutenant Mr. King at that safety stand down?
I don't recall.
Going back to the night when your parents were in town, were you already spending time with your parents when you invited some of your Marine friends over?
Yes.
And, approximately what time did some of your friends arrive?
I believe they arrived from 6 to 8 in that time frame. They came in 2 to 3 groups, so they didn't all come together. So I think they came between 6 and 8.
And when they came to hang out with yourself and your parents, was there alcohol there?
Yes,
And who had purchased the alcohol?
my parents.
And did you see any of your friends drinking any?
Just who were of age, and that's it.
And who was that was consuming alcohol of your friends?
It was me, King, and Rodriguez.
And when you were hanging out with your friends and with your parents, where did the hanging out occur, or the partying occur?
We were in the hotel room for a little bit, and then we went down to the pool area, into the hot tub.
And when you were first in the hotel room with your parents, did you see Lieutenant Mr. King? Did you see him have anything to drink?
He had, I saw him have 2 to 3 drinks maybe. No one was, at that time, no one was heavily drinking. It was just casually hanging out and having a beer or two over the course of a few hours.
And when you went down to the pool area in the hot tub, were people continuing to drink in the pool area of the hot tub?
Yes.
And was the defendant drinking down in the hot tub?
Yes, I believe he had a beer down there.
And how long do you think you spent at the hot tub with the jacuzzi?
Maybe an hour or so.
And after you were at the jacuzzi, what was the next thing that happened?
I believe we went upstairs, and whoever wasn't drinking, they were heading home. Me and Rodriguez were going to walk to the bars, and King had planned on going out to another bar with another group of friends.
When you go back into the room after being at the jacuzzi or hot tub area, did you see the defendant have any more beer at that point in time?
No.
You said that whoever wasn't drinking was going home. Is that correct?
Yes.
Everyone except for the defendant, right?
Yes.
You said that the defendant had decided to go meet some other people out that were out partying. Is that fair?
Yes.
And do you know how the defendant was going to get to where he was hanging out with other people?
Yes, he drove.
And did you say anything to him about the fact that he was driving?
No, I let him know he could stay and go to the bars with us and have a place to sleep. But at the time, he'd only had 2 to 3 beers over the span of a few hours, so it wasn't an issue. My dad also talked to him before he left and made sure he was okay and only had a beer or 2 to 3 beers over the time frame. He went from there.
And were you with Lieutenant Mr. King when he actually left in the hotel room or hanging out with him and your parents?
Yes.
What time was it that the Mr. King, the defendant, decided to leave?
I believe it was between 10 and 10:30.
Do you know who the defendant was going to meet?
I believe Hannah Talbot.
Was she another friend of yours from your squadron?
She wasn't my friend.
And was it you or was it your father that offered the defendant, Mr. King, a place to sleep at the hotel?
It was me.
Why did you do that?
Why? Just because I wanted to hang out with him. I told him if he wanted to go walk to the bars with us and we could crash at the hotel after, that he could.
Now, are you aware of whether there's any ramifications if you come onto base driving and you consume any alcohol?
Yes, it's zero alcohol coming from base.
And was that the same, I guess, is that the position now, was that the same position back in May of 2015?
I'm not positive if they did the zero tolerance then. It might have been. It still was very low, lower than county and city laws, but I don't think it was zero then.
And did you know back then what would happen if you came on base with alcohol in your system when you were driving?
Yes.
What would happen?
You would get, I believe you would get a DUI coming on base if it was over a certain amount.
Was that one of those things that was discussed or talked about at those weekend briefings?
I don't recall.
It would be fair to say that that was one of those consequences that was discussed in the safety stand-downs.
I believe so.
I have no further questions for this witness at this time.
All right, Mr. Casey, Ross?
Good morning, sir.
Good morning.
I want to talk to you a little bit of more detail. Let's talk first about, we've heard some testimony about this already, so we'll try to cover some of this relatively quickly. A good portion of the Liberty briefings, the weekly things, are instructions on if you find yourself in a situation on how to get home safely, correct?
Yes.
The Arrive Alive card, correct?
Yes.
Or call a friend, right?
Yes.
All of those things are discussed in terms of if you find yourself in a bad situation in a bar, that a fight's about to break out, how to get away from it, correct?
Yes.
All of those are geared toward preservation, mostly, of your career as a Marine, right?
Yes.
Those are designed to help you stay in the Marine Corps where they want you, true?
True.
When they talk to you about the dangers of DUI, it's largely in the context of what it can do to your military career, isn't it?
Correct.
And that talks about if you get arrested, you will be absent without permission, absent without leave, won't you?
Yes.
And that goes on to one of your fitness reports, your fit reps as we call them, correct?
Correct.
And that can stand in the way of future promotions, can't it?
Yes.
You can be, even in the more severe cases, discharged less than honorably, can't you?
You can.
And they go over that with you, don't they?
They do.
They go over the fact that you could get busted down in rank, correct?
Yes.
That you could lose pay, correct?
Yes.
That you would have your base privileges taken away from you, your driving privileges, correct?
Yes.
At any point in these Liberty briefings, however, does anyone tell you that now that you've been through a Liberty briefing, if you kill somebody, you'll be charged with murder? You ever heard that?
I believe so.
At a Liberty briefing?
They covered it at the stand, the safety stand down.
Well, let's talk about the safety stand down there. They go through, again, you have been through several of them, correct?
Yes.
You remember the officer talking about different types of jail times you could get for a DUI, right?
Yes.
And you remember the officer telling you that regardless if you were a Marine, he was not going to take it easy on you if he caught you drinking and driving.
Yes.
And he also told you that if you drank and drove, even if you got into an accident, even if it wasn't their fault, or your fault, that you could still be charged with a DUI. He told you that, correct?
Correct.
And then he also, when you were interviewed in this by Mr. Edwards here, do you recall telling Mr. Edwards that you don't remember the officer specifically talking about what you could be charged with if you got into a collision?
I don't remember.
So, again, at the safety stand-downs, there's a vast, vast amount of information that's covered in a short period of time, isn't it?
There is.
For safety reasons, correct?
Correct.
And there's a vast, vast amount of information shared with a large number of Marines at one time, correct?
Correct.
And again, we've heard this in testimony. There's no written materials given to you, is there?
No.
No. You're not asked to sign anything acknowledging what you learned at this safety stand-down, are you?
I believe you sign a roster saying you attended.
You sign in when you get there, right?
Correct.
Right. But after the fact, when they go through all the different things about whether it's drinking and driving, practicing safe sex, do you have to sign something that says, I understand, I recite what you've learned? Do you ever have to meet with anybody one-on-one to discuss how these things might affect you?
No.
Do you ever recall at the safety stand down the officer discussing with you the difference between vehicular manslaughter and murder? Do you recall them telling you?
I don't recall.
Do you recall the officer telling you that based on your attendance at a safety stand down, you could now be charged with murder?
No.
These signs that are posted around Barracks 3 and other places, they say don't drink and drive.
Correct.
They don't say much else, do they?
No.
They don't list the consequences that can befall you other than you might be AWOL or something, maybe one or two sentences, correct?
Correct.
They're not, they're billboards essentially, true?
Yes.
And the 90-day chart that you guys have, that's for DUI and all kinds of alcohol-related incidents, correct?
Yes.
And let's be honest, ARI, in all of their different contexts, are sometimes a problem in the Marine Corps, aren't they?
Yes.
And so every squadron wants to make sure that everybody is aware that, drink responsibly, correct?
Yes.
But prior to entering the Marine Corps, you'd heard that before, hadn't you?
I have.
You heard that drinking and driving was dangerous, hadn't you?
Yes.
You'd heard that drinking and driving could cause death, hadn't you?
Yes.
You'd heard that many times before entering the Marine Corps, hadn't you?
I have.
And you still continue to hear it many times outside of the Marine Corps, don't you?
Yes.
Okay, thanks, Jeff. That's fine.
Any redirect?
That's your honor.
All right, Mr. Wolford, thank you for coming in, sir.
Thank you.
We'll excuse you. You may call your next witness.
Thank you, Your Honor. We'll call Albert Bowden.
This matters the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so first and last name for the record.
My name is Robert Lawrence Bowden, first name R-O-B-E-R-T, last name B-O-W-D-E-N.
Thank you.
Good morning, Mr. Bowden.
Good morning.
Mr. Bowden, where do you work?
I'm currently employed with PKL Services Incorporated on Marine Corps Air Station Miramar.
Is that a civilian position?
Yes, ma'am.
And how long have you had that position?
I was employed with this company August 1st of this year. Oh, I'm sorry, of 2017.
Before August of 2017, where did you work?
I was a sergeant in the United States Marine Corps.
How long were you in the Marines?
5 years.
Where were you stationed?
I was stationed on Marine Corps Air Station Miramar.
For the entire 5 years?
Yes, ma'am.
Which squadron were you assigned to?
VMFAT 101.
And how long did you hold the role as sergeant?
I believe that was about 2.5, 3 years.
And what qualifies you in order to become the sergeant of that squadron?
I wasn't necessarily the sergeant of the squadron. It's a rank that was promoted to that position based off of my qualifications, expertise, skill set within that field, and performance among peers.
Do you remember, you said 2.5, 3 years that you were promoted to sergeant, so would that make you a sergeant around May in 2015?
I believe so. I was either a corporal or a sergeant at that time.
Sergeant and corporal, they're two different ranks, they're two different responsibilities, is that fair?
Yes, ma'am. Yes.
What is the responsibility of a corporal?
Well, both of them are leadership positions. A sergeant is just in charge of those all below him, so a corporal would be below a sergeant. However, when I was a corporal and a sergeant, my responsibilities pretty much stayed the same. I was still responsible for a shift and those Marines under my charge for that given shift.
And how long were you a corporal?
I was a corporal for just over a year. Probably, I believe it was a year and a month.
When you say that you were responsible for a shift, what does that mean?
So within the maintenance department of an air wing, they have it divided up amongst different hours in which you work, day crew, night crew, and mid crew. And the senior leadership in those positions, corporal sergeants and some staff sergeants and higher, are responsible for carrying out the daily duties within that given shift. And that entails the delegation of Marines and sailors beneath them in terms of daily duties and maintenance requirements as well.
How many people would you say that you supervised on a shift?
That varies greatly. I believe what you're referring to is back in 2015. And during that time, I believe I had about 60 Marines and sailors I was in charge of.
And that's how many people would work on one shift?
Yes, ma'am.
Now, as kind of a shift supervisor or as the corporal, was it your responsibility to do things like the Liberty or weekend briefings?
For lack of a better term, yes. We would often, some of the more senior leadership, we would take turns giving it weekly.
And what do you call it, Liberty or weekend briefings?
Weekend safety brief.
And you mentioned that other people take turns. How do you decide who's going to give the weekend safety brief?
Well, for instance, if it's myself and another sergeant, depending on who's on that given shift, sometimes depending on who's good at public speaking or if they just have different areas that they would like to cover, kind of like a lessons learned kind of mentality to pass that information along as an extra if that makes sense. It's not really one individual necessarily always giving it. It's more like a conglomeration of the leadership passing forth knowledge for the weekend.
And on any given shift, if there's about, dealing with the time frame around May of 2015 and the month before then, how many people are supervising that group of 60?
Well, on each shift, there's one individual who is primarily in charge as a non-commissioned officer level, but then they will have, there will be other non-commissioned officers assisting them as well with their duties. So to answer your question, I believe back in May 2015, with the number that we had, I believe there were about 3 non-commissioned officers.
On every shift?
I'm not exactly sure on that.
Now, you mentioned that a weekend safety briefing. How often are those given out?
Every weekend. Well, prior to the weekend.
Now, who determines what's discussed at that meeting?
So the staff NCOs, the gunnery sergeants, the staff sergeants, and the officers in charge will pass forth, to the NCOs what specifics to cover, but the general terms are always covered: drinking and driving, drug use, off-limit areas throughout San Diego, what you can do, what you can't do. Those are always the consistents covered every week.
When you say that DUI is covered every week, what do you mean?
We cover not drinking and driving, not driving while impaired. We always ensure that people had their Arrive Alive cards, that they basically had a plan, and that they knew that there was a zero tolerance policy, and if they found themselves in trouble, that they could call somebody.
How often during those Liberty briefings did anyone discuss what could happen if someone got a DUI?
Well, I know for every single one that I gave, I personally covered it.
What exactly did you say?
Anytime I would cover one of those briefings, I would inform everybody of a situation that happened to me when I was a Lance Corporal in Pensacola, Florida. I lost 2 of my best friends to a DUI, so that was always a soft topic for me.
When you say that you were a corporal or the sergeant of the BFM-AT 101 squadron, at any point in time were you kind of the shift supervisor for the defendant, Mr. King?
I believe at the time that I took that position was right when the defendant was moved into the tool room work center. It would have been right in that immediate time frame.
You know, during that time frame, say beginning February of 2014 through May of 2015, were there ever times when you gave a Liberty briefing in that time frame?
Yes, absolutely.
And was there ever times when the Mr. King was at any of those Liberty briefings?
I can't say for certain or not, but if he was on one of my shifts, then he would have been, unless he had a reasonable excuse for being absent.
And how would you know whether or not he was on your shift?
Well, every supervisor has a list of all the individuals placed on their shift, along with phone numbers. But back in 2015, I don't recall if he was or wasn't at that given time.
And you can't actually remember seeing him at one of your weekend briefings?
Not on my immediate ones that I'd given personally, no.
During that time frame, February of 2014 through May of 2015, how many of the Liberty briefings would you say that you gave during that time frame?
Could you repeat the time frame again?
Sure. February 2014 through May of 2015, so about 14 or 15 months.
Probably close to around 70 or 80.
7 or 8?
I said 70.
And were all of those briefings for the BFM-AT 101?
No, ma'am, not for VMFAT 101, just for my immediate work center, just power plants division, on my given shift, not the entire.
Power plants division?
Power plants, sorry.
Power plants.
Power plants, yes.
And at that point in time, was Lieutenant Mr. King, he was assigned to that division?
I can't state for certain, but yes, I believe he was.
Now, I'd like to take you back to the beginning of May of 2015 regarding a safety stand-down. We talked about Liberty briefings. What is a safety stand-down?
So a safety stand-down is where a squadron will come together as an entirety to get one big, basically Liberty briefing, a weekend briefing at the exact same time, but it's a little bit different in the sense that a lot of guest speakers will come and speak to everybody. A lot of PowerPoint presentations are presented, and it's typically an all-day affair as well.
How long would you say, going back just a short moment, how long would you say one of your weekend safety briefings would last?
Are you referring to the all-hands ones or just the individual ones that I would give?
The individual safety for your shift?
The ones that I would personally give would typically last about 10 to 15 minutes.
Is that consistent with, from your experience, other either colonel, corporals or sergeants that were giving the weekend briefings?
It was typically everybody would give about the same length speech, depending on what needs to be covered.
Do you remember, you said that the safety stand-down is generally an all-day affair. And specifically, I'd like to talk about the safety stand-down on the 7th of May of 2015. Are you familiar with that safety stand-down?
Not currently, no.
As a corporal or a sergeant, what was your responsibility, if any, for safety stand-downs?
Our primary responsibility was just to be in attendance, but also to verify that the rest of our Marines were there as well. Typically, that would be led by one of the staff NCOs for that work center, but it'd be delegated down to the NCOs.
Now, is an NCO different from a corporal or a sergeant?
No, I'm sorry, they're the same thing. NCO stands for non-commissioned officers, which refers to corporals and sergeants.
Mr. Coachman? Of course. Mr. Bowden, I have a document marked as exhibit number 86. Do you recognize this two-page document?
I don't recognize this specific document, but it does look like the typical safety stand-down that we would, all the NCOs and staff NCOs would get emailed as the plan for the day.
Is that something that you would normally get before one of your safety stand-downs?
Yes.
Okay, is that the type of document that you would receive before as part of the planning process for that safety stand-down?
Yes.
And does that document, does it appear to be something that is the same or similar as what you received on your email before a safety stand-down?
Yes.
And does it appear to have the logo of the Marine Corps and appear to have sufficient signatures on it to, in your opinion, be an authentic document from the Marine Corps?
Yes.
This time around, people would like to offer what they marked as exhibit number 86 into evidence.
86 is received.
Now, take you back to the safety stand down the week before, on May the 7th of 2015. Do you have an independent recollection of a police officer providing a presentation that morning or afternoon?
I believe so, yes.
Remember what the police officer spoke about?
Excuse me, we've had a lot of police officers speak with us, but if it's the officer in which I'm thinking about, yes, I do. He covered DUI as something that all police officers that speak to us talk about, but one of his big ones was also texting and driving.
Have you heard that officer speak more than once?
I don't recall.
Now, as one of your responsibilities as the corporal or the sergeant, were you aware of whether or not Mr. King, the defendant, was present at that safety stand?
Not at this time, I do not.
You remember speaking to my investigator, Mr. Edwards, about over 2 years ago?
I do, yes.
And you remember that when you spoke with him, he actually recorded your conversation?
I do, yes.
And then he actually wrote a report from the conversation that he wrote, is that right?
Yes, it is.
Did you have an opportunity to review his written statement this morning?
I did, yes, ma'am.
Would it be fair to say that with the passage of time, some of the details that you may have remembered back in September 2015 are different from what you remember today?
Without a doubt, yes, ma'am.
Would it be fair to say that you've forgotten some of the details that you may have mentioned or that you remember back in September 2015?
Yes, ma'am, that's correct.
Do you have any recollection of that safety stand down and the defendant's presence at that safety stand down?
Not personally at this moment, no. I do recall what I said, but as for the physical moment and interaction, no, I do not.
Now, you mentioned that as part of the weekend briefings, you also discussed the Arrive Alive card, is that right?
Yes, ma'am.
What is that?
The Arrive Alive card is, if I'm remembering correctly, it's basically a free taxi that you will pay back at a later time, but it's basically to guarantee safe arrival, whether it's back to your house, back to base, so on and so forth, that the command pays for immediately on the spot, and then you pay back your command at a later time.
And who gets those cards?
Everyone attached with the squadrons and departments on Marine Corps Air Station Miramar.
Now, you mentioned that this is the briefing just before the middle of May of 2015. Do they have these safety stand-downs more than once a year?
Yes, ma'am.
How often do they have them?
They typically have them 2 to 4 times a year, and they typically fall before large holidays. The summer is always a big one, along with Christmas. There's typically one around there as well.
And how often at these safety stand-downs is the topic of driving under the influence discussed?
It's discussed at every single stand-down.
How often is the dangers of drinking and driving discussed at these safety stand-downs?
It's discussed at every single safety stand-down.
Now, at BFM 18101, are there any sort of signs or posters or anything like that that you can recall that were up in the squadron or around the squadron or Hangar 3 around May of 2015?
No, I don't recall their exact locations, no, but there are always signs. Ever since I checked in there, there are signs throughout the squadron and facilities.
And what are the details of the signs, or what are the message?
One such sign said, "Arrive alive, don't drink and drive." We have various ones of pictures of alcohol and a wrecked car and a breathalyzer. Just they're posted throughout the squadron, upstairs and downstairs, and I believe on the fences as well.
Now, besides the safety stand down and the weekend briefings and the Arrive Alive card, are there any other programs that were in place back between February of 2014 and May of 2015 that addressed dangers of drinking and driving?
I don't recall.
When you were the shift supervisor, were you living on base at that time in barracks?
No, I was not.
And are you aware of any requirement that if you're driving on base, you have to have a decal?
I've heard that requirement before. I did not personally have a decal myself.
Did you live on base?
Briefly, for about a year, I did in 2013.
Was there any sort of program that anyone under the age of 25 had to go through in order to obtain a decal for their vehicle?
Yes, it's the Arrive Alive at 25. It's not just to receive a decal, though. It's whenever anybody's newly attached to that base or air wing.
Anyone newly attached to the base or air wing? And who makes sure that they get that training?
That would be the supervisors, but it's also a requirement on their check-in sheet that they receive when they get to the unit.
And was that something you ever had to follow up on or schedule for someone when you were a sergeant?
Not personally, no. That was a duty typically carried out by one of the staff NCOs.
And are you familiar with what that program was?
Not at this time, no.
Do you know who oversaw that program?
I do not.
Now, in the time that you were a shift supervisor, was there any time that there was a meeting that was more than a Liberty or weekend briefing, something where that was either a major or someone higher up the rank would come and speak to your shift?
I can't remember an exact time that occurred, but that was a common practice. Yes.
And if you go from a corporal to a sergeant, what is the next in the chain of command?
The next following sergeant would be a staff sergeant.
And in the time between February 14th, February of 2014 through May of 2015, was there ever a time that you remember either a master gunnery sergeant or Major King speaking to a shift that you were supervising?
There were various times, multiple times that those incidences happened when they would come speak with us.
And during any of those discussions, would it be fair to say that they're more formal than just your end of week meeting with your shift?
Not typically, no. When they would come to speak with our personal shift, it would typically be in a more informal setting.
And any time during those discussions or those informal meetings where the dangers of DUI was addressed?
I don't recall.
I have no further questions at this time, Your Honor.
Okay, back to you, Mr. Kinsey.
Morning, sir.
Good morning.
You have a document in front of you that you were presented with on the United States Marine Corps letterhead.
Would that be 86?
Yes.
Yes.
And that is the, sort of the program description, I guess, if you will, for the safety stand down.
Yes, sir.
And it lists what the mission is, how it's going to be executed. It even goes into such detail as transportation that will be provided, et cetera,
Correct.
and how to get Marines to, it's at the Bob Hope Theater, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay, that's on NCAS Miramar.
Yes, sir.
And if you could, take a look at the second page. You see, starting at about 13:30, which in plain English to the jury is 1:30, correct?
Yes, sir.
1:30 p.m.
Yes, sir.
That's when it says flight ops complete,
Yes, sir.
correct? And then getting around 1400, it starts giving descriptions of the trolleys departing from various parking lots to bring Marines to the theater, correct?
Yes, sir.
And then it says that the introduction, the actual program itself, 101 Days of Summer introduction begins at 1500, correct?
Yes, sir.
That's 3 o'clock, right?
Yes, sir.
And then it says closing remarks are given at from 1450 to 1700, which is from 4:50 to 5 o'clock p.m.
Yes,
Correct?
sir.
So the entire safety briefing on this particular one, from the introduction to the closing remarks, was 2 hours, correct?
On this paper, yes, sir.
Yes. And during that time, there is a section that talks about motor vehicle, recreational vehicle safety, correct?
Yes, sir.
And that time frame given for those topics to be discussed was from 15:05, which would be 3:05 p.m., to 15:50 p.m., which would be 3:50 p.m.
That's correct.
So that's 45 minutes that is spent on motor vehicle, recreational vehicle safety.
Yes, sir.
Correct. And motor vehicle, recreational vehicle safety encompasses a relatively large cross-section of topics, doesn't it?
It can, yes, sir.
It's not just about DUI, is it?
No.
It's about all different kinds of drag racing, street racing, any types of things that you guys might think that some of your young Marines might be tempted to engage in over the summer, correct?
Correct.
And during that time is when also, during those 45 minutes, a portion of that DUI is talked about.
Yes, sir.
And the weekend safety briefings that you give, typically you said are approximately 15 minutes.
Yes, sir.
And again, during those 15 minutes, you're briefing your Marines on a multitude of potential hazards that they could encounter while away on a short liberty. True?
Yes, sir.
We've talked about this with some of the other witnesses. That could be everything from DUI to domestic violence to bar fights to street racing to, and there's probably a pretty healthy list of things that the Marines are warned against, correct?
Correct.
And the warnings are largely given in the sense of what it could do to their military career, isn't it?
I never personally took that approach to them, but yes, some would give that aspect to it.
And again, the multiple topics are designed to have an element of prevention. Correct?
Absolutely. Yes, sir.
Now, the signs that we talked about on your direct examination that are placed up, the arrive alive or click it or ticket, things like that, they're just like posters that are placed around various places on base, correct?
Correct.
Much like we would see in the hallways of a college, correct?
Correct.
Or a high school,
That's correct.
or a workplace,
Correct.
and billboards we see on the freeway, correct?
Yes, sir.
They're not detailed proclamations of here's what's going to happen to you, here will be the criminal charges that you will face, this is what could, they're billboards.
Yes.
All right, thanks. That's all. Thank you.
Any redirections, right?
Do you remember subject to recall?
Okay, thank you, Mr. Bowden. We'll
Thank you.
excuse you at this time, subject to recall. And you may call your next witness.
Thank you, people call Jennifer Mata.
You solemnly state that the evidence you shall give in this matter is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God. Yes, please. Thank you. Please be seated and witness stand. Please state your full name and spell your first and last name for the record.
My name is Jennifer Hernandez Mata. first name Jennifer, last name Mata.
Good morning, Ms. Hannah.
Good morning.
Ms. Hannah, where do you work?
Currently unemployed.
Before you were unemployed, where did you work?
I worked with United States Navy at Winter One, Marine Corps.
You were with the Navy or the Marine Corps?
Well, I was with the Navy, but I was stationed at the Marine Corps base.
How does that work?
They put you wherever they want.
And what was your role in the Navy?
I was a second-class petty officer, aviation machinist mate.
What does it mean to be a second-class petty officer? Is that higher or lower? Where is that in the realm of, I guess, of command?
E5, there's, well, for airmen, you got E1 through E3, and then E4, 5. I was E5.
Is the position of a second-class petty officer, is that more of a supervisory role or someone with a little bit more experience than someone who's a brand-new sailor in the Navy?
Yes, I was a supervisor.
Now, you mentioned that you were a second-class petty officer and aviation machinist mate. Is that right?
Yes,
You were assigned to Miramar.
yes.
How long were you assigned to Miramar?
3 years, I believe.
When did you begin that assignment?
Oh, man. 2014 or maybe the end of 2013.
And when you were assigned to Miramar, were you assigned just in general, or were you assigned to a squadron within?
The squadron, VMFAT 101.
And what was your role within the squadron?
I was there. I was put in a power plant shop to work amongst my peers.
What did you do day-to-day work?
Well, when I first checked in, I had to get requalified to work on F-18s, their engines.
You have some experience or education regarding mechanics, is that fair to say?
Yes, they educate you in the Navy.
When you were assigned to VMFAT 101, were you assigned there as a supervisor or as someone who was just working on planes as well?
Just working there.
And in your role there, you mentioned that were you always in VMAT 101?
I'm sorry, repeat that.
Sure. There's some water there if you'd like some.
Can you repeat the question, ma'am?
Sure. When you were with VFMAT 101, were you always there just as a mechanic, or was there some point in time when you took on more of a supervisory capacity?
Yes. Well, they evaluate you every 6 months, and during one of my evaluations, they needed somebody to take over the tool room, and well, not take over, to work in. And while I was working in the tool room, I made my way up to supervisor.
How long were you assigned, or did you work in the tool room?
2 years, I believe.
Do you recall when you got that assignment to the tool room?
I don't. Sorry.
When you were with how long total were you with the Navy or the Marines, or like employed by the military?
8 years.
How much of that time did you spend actually working at MCAS in Miramar?
My last 3 years.
So it would be fair to say that you worked at Miramar from probably the end of 2013 through 2016?
15.
2015?
Mhm.
Now, in that time frame, dealing with the time frame of February of 2014 through May of 2015, a 15 month time frame, did you ever have to attend a safety stand-down?
Yes.
And what is a safety stand-down?
It's a reminder for our peers and the chain of command of what is really expected of you during the holiday breaks or weekends or anything longer than a weekend.
How often do they have safety stand-downs?
Every holiday. We had something called a palm period, which are big groups of holidays, for example, Christmas break and New Year's break. They would have safety stand-downs.
What were some of the topics that were discussed at the safety stand-downs?
You have aircraft safety, you had drinking and driving, the different programs that they have for the military. If you plan to go out drinking and driving, just your safety fundamentals of being out over holidays.
You mentioned different programs. What do you mean by that?
They had a Drive Alive card program. Liberty Buddies. And that's all I can remember.
What is the Drive Alive card program?
When you check into the command, you go see, I believe it was a DAPA program coordinator. I can't tell you what DAPA means. I don't remember. But they give you a contract kind of to sign, and it is, they give you a card, and you can, on this card you had a phone number that you can call, and it was kind of like a prepaid cash for taxi drivers to get you, I think it was to base, or if you lived off base to your home. I can't really remember.
And did everyone who had to check into BMF 18101 receive that card?
Yes. It was part of your check-in sheet requirements.
You also mentioned something called Liberty Buddies. What is that?
It was for airmen. If you were going out of town, you had to fill out a sheet of who you're going to go out with, like overnight, if you're going to go out overnight.
Did that apply to people that were working in either the tool room or as a mechanic?
Yes.
And When you were assigned to MCAS Miramar, did you live on base?
No, I did not.
In order to park on MCAS Miramar, did you have to get a decal for your vehicle?
Yes, ma'am.
Did you have to go through any sort of process to get that decal for your vehicle?
Yes. To go to passing decal with your order saying that you worked on base, and they would then, I guess you have to show your registration, driver's license. They take down all your information and your license plate number, and then give you a sticker.
When you were assigned to MCAS Miramar, were you over the age of 25?
Yes.
Now, when you were assigned to BFMAT 101, did you recall back in that time frame from February 2014 through May of 2015, whether or not there was any sort of signs or posters in the hangar 3 where you worked that dealt with the topic of driving under the influence?
I know they had some on a safety board. Where they do kind of like safety minutes. They had the sign like don't drink and drive, and other mishaps, safety mishaps and stuff.
What do you mean by safety mishaps?
With the aircraft, things to pay attention to.
And I'd like to take you back to the 7th of May of 2015. Did you attend a safety stand-down that day?
I don't recall the date, but yes.
Is there anyone in court that you recognize as someone that you worked with when you were assigned to MCAS Miramar?
Yes.
And who is that?
Jason King.
And how do you know Mr. King?
I worked with him in the power plant shop for a short period of time, and then I got transferred to tool room, and then he came to work with me in tool room.
And how long did he work with you in the tool room?
Oh, I don't remember
More than a month?
how long. Maybe. I don't really remember how long.
When you worked with Mr. King, would it be fair to say at that point in time you were his supervisor?
Yes.
And what were your responsibilities as his supervisor?
To teach him our rules and make sure that he had everything that he needed to get taken care of, to transfer into the tool room, teach him all of our procedures, getting him familiarized with our atmosphere, which was kind of different from power plants.
Was there any sort of requirement as a member of the BFMAT 101, did I get that right? 101 squadron regarding parking on base or anything like that?
At the time, I didn't have to talk to him anything about the parking on base because he had already been working in the power plant shop and they had taken care of all that.
I'd like to discuss with you what, if anything, you recall about the content of that safety stand-down in May of 2015.
Okay, we're going to get into that. Is this a convenient place to break?
It would be, Your Honor.
Okay, we'll take our lunch recess. We'll see everyone at 1:30.